A few weeks into the journey, feeling somewhat desperate, he decided upon a strategy. Whether Whenever he experienced such inner turmoil at home, what always calmed him was to head outdoors and observe life around him. In that way, he could forget himself. This was now his world. He would observe life on board this ship, the characters of the various sailors, and Captain himself, as if he were taking note of the markings of butterflies. For instance, he noticed that no one grumbled about the food or the weather or the tasks at hand. They valued stoicism. He would try to adopt such an attitude. It seemed that Fitzroy was slightly insecure and needed constant validation about his authority and high position within the Navy. Darwin would supply that to no end. Slowly, he began to fit into the daily scheme of life. He even picked up some of the mannerisms of the sailors. All of this distracted him from his loneliness. Several months later, the Beagle arrived in Brazil, and now Darwin understood why he wanted so badly to go on this voyage. He was completely mesmerized by the intense variety of the vegetation and wildlife. This was a naturalist's paradise. It was not like anything he had observed or collected in England. One day, on a walk through a forest, he stood on the side and witnessed the most bizarre and cruel spectacle he had ever seen. A march of tiny black ants, their columns over 100 yards long, devouring every living thing in their path. Everywhere he turned, he saw some example of the fierce struggle for survival in forests with an overabundant life. In attending his work, he quickly realized he also faced a problem. All of the birds, the butterflies, the crabs, the spiders, and spiders he caught were so unusual. Part of his job was to choose judiciously what to send back. But how could he possibly distinguish what was worth collecting? He would have to expand his knowledge. Not only would he have to spend endless hours studying everything in his sight on his walks and take copious notes, but he would have to find a way to organize all of this information, catalog all of these specimens, bring some order to his observations. It would be a Herculean task, but unlike schoolwork, it excited him. These were living creatures, not vague notions in books. As the ship headed south along the coast, Darwin realized that there was an interior of parts of South Africa and no naturalist had explored yet. Determined to see every form of life that he could possibly find, he began a series of treks into the pampas of Argentina, accompanied by only gauchos collecting all kinds of unusual animal and insect specimens, adopting the same energy as on the ship. He observed the gauchos in their ways, fitting into their culture as if one of them on these other jaunts on these other jaunts he would brave marauding Indian, poisonous insects, and jaguars lurking in the forest. Without thinking of it, he had developed a taste for adventure and would have shocked his family and friends. A year into the voyage, on a beach some 400 miles south of Buenos Aires, Darwin discovered something that would set his mind into thinking for many years to come. He had come upon a cliff with streaks of white amid the rock. Seeing that there were enormous bones of some sort, he began to chip away at the rock, extracting as many of these remains as possible. They were the size of a kind he had never seen before. The horns and armor of what seemed like to be a great giant armadillo, the huge teeth of a mastodon, and then, most surprisingly, the tooth of a horse. When the Spaniards and Portuguese had first arrived in South America, there were no horses to be found, and yet this tooth was quite old and predated their arrival. He began to wonder if such species had died off long ago. The idea of all of life being created and once and for good seemed illogical. More important, how could so many species become extinct? Could life on the planet be in a state of constant flux and development? Months after he was trekking through the high Andes looking for rare geological specimens to send back, at an elevation of about 12,000 feet, he discovered some fossilized seashells and deposits of marine rocks, a rather surprising find at such an altitude. He examined them and the surrounding flora. He suspected that these mountains had once stood along the Atlantic Ocean. A series of volcanoes thousands of years ago must have raised them higher and higher instead of relics to support the stories in the Bible. He was finding evidence for something shockingly different. As the journey progressed, Darwin noted some obvious changes in himself. He used to find almost any kind of work boring, but now he could labor all hours in the day. In fact, so much to explore and learn, he hated wasting a single minute of the voyage. He cultivated an incredible eye for flora and fauna in South America. He could identify local birds by their songs and markings on their eggs, their manner of taking flight. All this information he could catalog and organize in an efficient manner. More important, his whole way of thinking had changed. He would observe something, read and write about it, then develop theory after even more observation. The theories and observations feeding off one another, full of details about so many facets of what the world was exploring. The ideas were sprouting up out of nowhere. In September 1835, the Beagle left the Pacific coast of South America and headed west for the journey home. Their first stop on the way was a series of virtually unoccupied islands known as the Galapagos. The islands were famous for their wildlife, but nothing could prepare Darwin for what he would find there. Captain Fitzroy gave him 1 week to explore one of the islands, and then they would be on their way. From the moment he stepped on the island, Darwin realized something was different. The small speck of land was crammed with life, that was not like anywhere else. Thousands of black marine iguanas swarming around him on the beach in the shallow water. 500-pound tortoises lumbering about to the shore. Seals, penguins, flightless cormorants, all cold water creatures inhabiting a tropical island. By the end of the week, he had counted 26 unique species of land birds on this island alone. His jaws began to